What is up? I'm Marcel and welcome back to The Modern Filmmaker. So in this video we are color grading some footage from the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K in Davinci Resolve 16. This was highly suggested by some of you awesome subscribers, so strap in and let's have some fun. So I've got a couple clips from the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K pulled into DaVinci Resolve 16, and I've got to say, first impressions, I am impressed. I mean, this is 6K raw footage in 50 frames a second, and this is slowed down to 24 frames a second, so you're seeing it in slow-mo 6K, and I mean, it looks great. If I were to zoom in here, I'll say there's certain cameras, you know, like the GH5, that have smaller sensors, and you have to worry about noise in the shadows, even when you're outside and there's plenty of light. But I've got to say, with this camera, I'm not seeing anything that you really need to be worried about. And I know that may seem kind of, you know, well, I mean, Marcel, this is in the middle of the day, it looks like. I mean, you shouldn't have any noise problems. But trust me, whenever you're working with anything but full frame, you always kind of risk that. And sometimes even when you do work with full frame, depending on what camera you're using, you're still kind of taking that risk of, am I going to have noise in the shadows? Especially when you have a high dynamic shot like this. You can already see that the sky is almost blown out. We're going to see how much we can recover of that. And you can see you definitely have a lot of shadows here in the stairs. But overall, I mean, I'm just really impressed with not only the dynamic range, the color accuracy, everything looks really good just right off the bat. If I wanted to turn this video around without doing much coloring at all, that is possible. That would be possible. It looks that good. First impressions, really impressed. Way to go, Blackmagic Design. Now let's see what we can do in the color tab, because that's where all the fun starts. And for this footage, because it's Blackmagic Design raw footage, I'm going to go ahead and go to the camera raw, because this should work just seamlessly. If I come down here to where it says decode using, where it says project, I'll come down to clip. And this way it'll say white balance as shot, and then pretty much the rest of the settings are how the camera was set at the time of shooting. And I'm going to leave this all where it's at for now and just come over here to the contrast and maybe pull this down a little bit to kind of recover a little more detail, because this looked a little video-esque, kind of where it was around this 1.31 region. It looks great, you know, and I'm impressed for sure, but I'm definitely going to pull the contrast down a little bit, and you can kind of see that we're recovering some stuff in the shadows. The highlights aren't quite as harsh. You know, his face here, if we look at his face in particular, when this was pulled up to that 1.30 range, you know, one side of his face was super bright, the other side is super dark, and that just kind of, that's really that video feel that we're going to try to avoid here. So let's pull this down a little bit, and this already looks a good bit smoother. Yeah, absolutely. There's really not much we have to do to this shot. It already looks so good. But moving forward in our first node, I'm going to come over here to the shadow controls right here and just pull these up a little bit. Actually, you know what? Instead of that, I'm going to use the curves, because I would kind of like to recalibrate where the lighting is in this entire shot just slightly. And if I go down here to the bottom of the curves and just pull this up, then we're going to get some of these blacks back a little bit, and then I'm going to make a point here too, and I'm just going to pull the shadows up, and I'm going to, you know, re-implement some contrast back into the shot later on. But for now, I just kind of want to get rid of some of that harsh fall off that was happening in the shadows of his shirt, his face, and the stairs, just to bring a little bit more detail, to make the shot itself a little brighter, a little cleaner and easier to look at. And then from here I will go, I'll hit Alt-S to make a new node, and then I will bump up the saturation a little bit. The white balance looks good to me, but I would like a little more saturation. That looks pretty solid about right there. And if I go forward to where this sky is, this sky looks pretty blown out. How can we add some drama to that sky? It's actually pretty simple. You guys have seen me do this in another video. Great technique. I'm going to make a new node with Alt-S, and then I'll come over to the qualifier, and I'll hit the highlight button so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to come and get kind of I'm going to go into the highlights, get rid of a lot of these shadows, even a bunch of the midtones, and come to about here. That looks about good. And I will soften this low spectrum here, and I'll denoise just a little bit and blur a little bit just in case. I don't really see any issues, but you never know. And then I'll hit off the highlight button, and I'm going to bring the gain up right here in the primaries bars, because this would be the highlights a little bit, just a tad, not much. Do you see that difference there? When I bring this down, I'll hit that reset button and then start raising. Already we're seeing a little bit more contrast, and we're only at 0.03 is what we've added. So from here I'm going to hit Alt P and make a parallel node, and these nodes will work together in unison. So if I do something to one of these, like let's say pull the reds up, then it'll do it to both of them. They just work in unison. So with this one I'm actually going to do the same thing, but I'm going to qualify some of the higher highlights. So I'm going to hit this highlight button up here so I can see what I'm cutting out, and then go back to these lows and drag this up until, let's say, the people are gone and we're getting the highlight to this building. And then, yeah, just actually, let's go even further than that. Let's go to about here, to where we get the bottom of the clouds. We're cutting off just the shadows of the clouds, and I'll soften that out just a little bit, not too much, and then a little blur and a little denoise, and hit that highlight button, and I'll come and raise those just a little, not too much. But if you see, we're already separating the sky as we pull these highlights up here. We're already separating the sky, which is nice. And we're brightening up those windows a little bit too, but we don't want to go too far. Take a look at the scopes. We don't want to go too crazy. We just want to pull these up a little bit, just to where we are seeing a little bit more kind of depth there in the sky. Because before, if I deactivate both of those nodes, it just looks like a washed out kind of crummy day. And then I am going to actually, let's say, bring down the entire highlights spectrum, and then kind of come back, and just to give us some more room at the top, and then I'm going to come back and requalify these highlights. Yeah, about right there. And then I turn this one on about right there. Boom. Now I can make one more with Alt P, and then give us a little more depth by bringing this even higher to, let's say, about right here. Soften that out, and a little blur, a little denoise just in case, and then we will bump that gain up there. And boom. If we were to deactivate these three, we're seeing quite a difference there, and that's just beautiful. So one thing I'm going to do with this top one here that has a little bit of them in it as well, let me actually pull this one down to get a little more stuff. That looks pretty good right there. And I'm actually going to warmthen this highlight area up a little bit. I know that seems wild, but I'm going to actually warm this up a little bit. And I'm going to come to, let's say, the primaries wheels, and I'll come to the gain and push this a little towards the orange reddish to warm it up a little bit. I know it seems wild, but trust me here. And I can come back to this one here, which holds these high highlights, and this would be pretty desaturated anyway. So what I'm going to do is actually just come to the saturation and pull this down to 0, and come down to this one as well and pull the saturation down to 0. And now we have not thrown this color into the sky. We're just throwing it into this one section. And now we can kind of see it more clearly and even dial it back a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is make one more node where I will come to the curves and the luminance for saturation. I'll make a node or a point here with the black button, and then pull these down. And then I'll make a point here towards the midtones, and then I'm going to actually pull the saturation down in all these highlights. That way we still have a little bit of that warmth, but we don't get carried away with it. I'll actually scoot that back by making a new point here, right clicking to get rid of this original point. And you can see we had a lot more tint before that node. And we can even bring this down a little bit. And that's really just kind of smoothened it out. If I were to deactivate, you can see it's kind of really kind of giving us more warmth, but just kind of in the places that we needed it to warm, to kind of smoothen out the shot and how it looks. And it's not kind of deep into the sky, and it gives us a little more depth into the sky as well. Now if we play this back and like take a look at his skin here, take a look at his arm and his face as I go through and I deactivate these nodes. And this is what we had to begin with, which looked great at the beginning, but now when we kind of go back and let's say activate these, you can really see we got a much smoother, easier kind of to look at vibe going on here. Really nice, really nice. Now if we want, we can even make one more node and just add some more contrast back in if we just want it to pop a little more. And still we get that punchiness without having that kind of gloomy feel, because obviously it was a gloomy day, but that also kind of gives us like that non-studio kind of look, you know, because ideally these people would have been lit, and if they would have been lit, this would have had, you know, probably more of this kind of look anyway, with less harsh shadows, a little smoother. The skin tones definitely look a lot smoother. They're not as pale because of the way that the light's reflecting off of the overcast sky. So anyway, first color grade with Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera footage, 6K. I'm loving it. I mean, I'm all about it. Maybe one more thing I would do is just pull these blacks down by making a point here in the shadows and the curves, and then just pulling this down a little bit. And that's preference. I mean, you know, this kind of had that film fade look. If I just go back to how it was, this kind of had that a little bit of fade on the blacks, as you can see here in the scopes. But if you did want it to be a little more punchy, you can simply make a point there and just pull those little blacks down. You can really see it here in the stairs, how much more depth that adds to those stairs. Now if we play it back, yeah, that looks great. That looks beautiful. Really good. Really cool. For now, let's go ahead and move on to the next shot, which looks like these two models in this like warehouse looking thing. Looking really good. And let's go back to our camera raw settings, where I'll go back to project and go to clip. This shot seems to be a little different than the other one. And I'm going to highlight recovery and actually hit that button. And you can see that it kind of gives us a little more details back outside, which is really nice, because this was really kind of just muddy. It's not only blown out, but it's muddy, which is like a double negative. But this at least gives us a little bit of information back. So if I come over here to, I'm going to go to the contrast. I'm actually going to bump this down again, just like I did in the last shot, just to help us, you know, because once again, if I have this where it was, we've got a bunch of things going on back there. And with this down, we kind of recovered a little bit more information of the window frames and this little bar here, this pole. And that just helps a little bit. And so moving on, what I'm going to do here is bring down some of these highlights. As we can see, there's so much going on. So I'm just going to go to the curves and pull these down, just so we can kind of recalibrate where the light is here. Because one thing too is the background is a lot brighter than the foreground, which unfortunately the foreground is the talent. So we need to kind of figure out a way to make them pop. So how I'm going to do this is with this there, I'm going to come to our shadows also and pull these up a little bit. And that's already helping give us more detail on the talent, which is great. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave these highlights at 0. And then moving on, I'm actually going to add a little bit of saturation. I'm going to come to the RGB mixer and just pump the red, the green, and the blue up to give us a little more saturation back. And then I'll come over here to the key, and I'll pump this down to maybe 0.5. And then in this next node, I'm actually going to make a power window. And this is a technique I don't know if I've ever used before on the channel, but it can really be helpful. So with our power window, I'm going to go ahead and stretch this out a little bit and make this a little bigger. And then I will soften the crap out of it. And that looks about good right there. And then what this is going to do, we're kind of relighting. So I kind of want to make them brighter. I kind of want to do like a reverse vignette. So instead of making the sides darker, I kind of just want to make the middle focus a little brighter. So with that selected, I will hit the highlight button just so we can take a look. And yeah, that looks good. And then from there, I'm going to come over to the primaries bars, and I'm going to up the gamma a little bit. And you can see they're getting a little brighter. I'm actually going to up the shadows here in the shadows dial. I'm going to up those shadows a little bit also. And maybe bump the highlights just a tad. Now you're seeing that it just looks a lot more even with the rest of the shot. If I were to deactivate and activate, now they look a little bit more punchy, a lot less dull. And I can actually bring down the offset. I'm going to reset the offset. Instead of that, I'm going to bring in some contrast here. This will help them pop, and it'll also bring the shadows back down to where they need to be, at least the blacks, not really the shadows, because I want to bring those shadows up, obviously, but it'll help bring those blacks down to where they need to be to make sense with the rest of the shot. Now, if I deactivate, activate, it looks pretty smooth, and maybe I'll even bring these highlights down a little. Yeah, about there. Deactivate, activate. Yes, it looks a lot better. It's like totally recalibrated. Now, if I go forward with Alt S and make another node, and then I'll hit Alt L to make a layer mixer, I will do a technique I've done several times on the channel. With the bottom layer, I'm going to come over to the primaries, or to the RGB mixer, and hit monochrome, and then I will right click the layer mixer and get a composite and soft light. And this, to me, is just, it's just a great fashion thing. Especially this, obviously these two are supposed to look cool and like edgy and like, we're the cool kids in town. You know, we ride skateboards and smoke cigarettes and whatever. And so this technique is just great for that punchy kind of contrast. And if I just deactivate all this, you can see that, I mean, come on. Let me deactivate this, as a matter of fact. Let me deactivate this and then reset the camera raw to, let's just say, project. See, that's like a different look than if we go to clip and turn this on. This is much more vibrant, much more punchy. And now from here, we can make just a couple more adjustments to kind of stylize it our own. So if I come over here to the log, we can give us a little color contrast. Go over to the midtones and actually pump a little warmth into these midtones. I like that. We're kind of seeing that in the floor and their skin up here in the red and in this ventilation here. And I'll pull the shadows down a little to the blue, not too much. And I'm actually going to go to press this 1 here and then go to the low range and the high range, primarily just the low range, which is, the low range meaning the shadow range here. So right now, the blues that I put into the shadows are at this 0.333 spectrum and down. So if I come down, this will be pushing that warmth in the midtones. That'll be pushing the midtones into the shadows. So if I just bring these down, you can see that we're getting a little more of that warmth than we are the blue. And we're really just, it's kind of choking that blue a little bit, which is kind of perfect. And they're mixing really well together. If I deactivate that, you can see we've added just a little more color in there. And we've got a cool mix too. It's almost like a greenish that we're seeing, very film-esque on the jacket. When before it was kind of like a, I don't know, like a bluish, I don't know, but I like the difference for sure. And then I'll push these midtones up a little more, and I'll leave the highlights alone, and I'll make one more node, and we'll do what we did in the last one with the luminance versus saturation in the curves. I'll hit this black dot here to make our black points, and then just desaturate the blacks. And then I'll make a point here towards the midtones and desaturate our highlights also. And yeah, I think that looks really, really smooth. Yeah, I love that. And before, it's like the background was really vibrant and they were kind of flat. And we've managed to really, really make them stand out, really make them pop. And if I come over to this, it's probably wide enough to where we don't even need to track it. Yeah, we don't even need to track it. Like that's fine. But if you did, of course, if you did, you could easily just come over here, press that track button, and it would give you some great tracking, as Davinci always does. Man, this is really good footage. Hats off to Blackmagic. Well done. well done. Well done. Anyway, guys, if you like this video, definitely make sure to click that like button. I would really appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed, definitely subscribe. And as always, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. And as always, I'm Marcel, and this has been The Modern Filmmaker, and I will see y'all next time. Peace!